sample rate is snapshots of frequencies, and is the frequency resolution.
Okay, so the resolution of frequency. All right, so just the the shorthand version of what I gave that to you. Do you remember what it was?
The shorthand was frequency resolution.
I'm sorry, I should say the illustration of what I gave that to you. Did you write that down? What was the thing I said, hey, this is a lot like?
Basically, I got out of it was a snapshot of frequencies.
Which is it's associated with photographs. You guys remember that? Photographs? Yeah, do you remember that? I said, hey, look, when we talk resolution, we're talking, if we take this at a high res, what do we get to do with it? We can make it smaller, but we can't make it bigger, essentially. We can't make it better, all right? So in this whole game, there's going to be, we do all of our sessions here on these iMacs because they're wonderfully challenged with processing power. Because of that, we keep them at low res. If we had more beefed up computers, we could do these at high res, but it's a more likelihood that it would fail on you. And it does sometimes in this room when we start working with big sessions, even at 44.1. But at the end of the day, all it is we're just likening it to the photograph that obviously we want a good resolution. Now, audio resolution can clearly be heard if you side by side them. A lot of times you can't necessarily hear it when you're hearing it standalone, like if you only heard something at 48. But as soon as you hear the same song at 48 as you do at 96, there is a difference. But essentially it's a smoothing out. Just in the same way photographs are more smooth, right? Based upon the pixel count. Another thing to think about here, we talked about bit depth. There's 16 and there's 24. What was 32? Do you go by Tino or do you go by?
Yeah, I go by Tino.
Tino, okay. Go by where?
Is it 32 like used for like HD? Or?
No. I mean, it can be, but what was HD audio? Do you guys remember what HD audio classifies as?
Double the frequency.
Okay, so HD audio technically starts at 88.2, but it's a frequency resolution. It's not necessarily bit depth alone, although bit depth is a part of it. 32-bit is in reference to. Do you remember, Mike? Did you have that in your notes?
No, I did not.
Okay, so our highest level of bit depth that's useful. So this is just to kind of fill you in here. The highest useful bit depth is 24 bits. That's the highest useful. The problem is there's some things that we do that degrade the dynamic resolution that actually bring it under 24 bits. So in order to keep it above or at 24 bits, what we do, what's up, buddy? Yeah, you can use your computer. What we do is we actually move it to 32-bit. And from using it in 32-bit, it allows us essentially to have extra bits that will allow for manipulation of audio without degrading the dynamic quality. Now, bit depth is dynamic resolution. I mentioned when is this heard, and I mentioned, hey, how is this such a big deal? Just remembering that the bit is essentially not it's not like sample rates. It's not necessarily the how many snapshots as much as it is the number of binary digits that get included when trying to re-represent the audio, right? So it's the difference between 16 and 24. It obviously isn't just 8, right? It's several thousand. Actually, it's more than 10,000. I don't know what the actual number is. It's high. It's very high. I'm sure the book probably has it in there, but it's very high because it's more than just adding a few extra digits. It's actually just like a binary number, right? Yeah, it's just like a combination lock. It's adding a series of it's changing this from a 16-bit combination lock to a 24-bit combination lock. Except the only catch is you only get ones and zeros, but it will still manipulate the amount of digit changes or variables that can still take place. And if you would know it if you were to take a sheet of paper and write the combinations of ones and zeros in a 16-bit versus the combination variables, in 24. Because as soon as you go, all right, well let's just try to figure this out. Okay, so what's our first base one would be 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. That's only 6. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and that's the first option. And then the next one would be adding a 1 somewhere in the line. And then you eventually have, as soon as you add that 1, then you add another 1, and then you add another 1, and then you add another 1. You see what I'm saying? Like literally, that's how the compounding of the resolution takes place here. Oh, here you go, buddy. And if you get a Pro Tools session up, just call it week 2, save it wherever you're saving stuff.
Okay.
Okay, wherever you're saving your stuff. Make sure your interface is online. Okay, interleaved. What was interleaved?
Interleaved is when they all compress into one file.
Okay, and compress is not a word.
Not compressed. Multiple channels in one file.
Yes. Okay, so it's the interleaved in this. Interleaved essentially means that one file is going to harbor multiple channels. Last week I showed you a 5.1 session, and I said, hey, look at this file. It's a 5.1 file, but guess what? It's represented in one file. It has 6 channels, 5.1. It has 6 channels altogether, ultimately, but it's just one file. So that's how you can download stuff off of iTunes, right? And have it be one file, but yet 2 channels, or have it be one file of a movie and yet have surround sound. It's because the data is interleaving. Now, what that means in Pro Tools is what? Because that's what that means. What does it mean in Pro Tools? I mean, what does that mean functionality-wise? And you can chime in here if you have any ideas. I don't know at what level you are, so you can jump in if you feel like you know an answer. What does that mean for Pro Tools if we're interleaving in Pro Tools, if it's an option that's given to us?
Is that you can use like different things, or kind of like the MIDI stuff, or different components coming into the program?
Well, no.
I tried.
No, but you tried. No, but you tried. No, actually, no one has an answer. You guys don't remember my conversation about this last week? Because we went into
the multiple channels in one file.
It might be in the Command 2 section. Did you have Command 2 somewhere?
Command 2.
Oh, session 7?
Yeah, it was in there that I was talking about this. What it basically means is it basically means if you happen to record anything in stereo or in 5.1, remember we were talking about that last week, if you record it in stereo or 5.1, when you go to the audio files folder, it gets represented as one file instead of the broken down version of it. Because normally, if it's not interleaved, if you record a stereo file, when you go to the audio files folder, there's a left and there's a right. With this option on, it's just one file, and it gets represented as 2. If you recorded it in 5.1, which we talked a little bit about last week, it would be 6, right? 6 separate files versus just one file that represents 6. What's the benefit? Anybody remember?
They could get it all in one file.
Yes? What's the benefit of not having it in one file?
It has its own separate file.
Yeah. I mean,
each channel has its own separate file.
Yeah, which could be very nice and very beneficial. Here's what I see a lot. How many of you have ever recorded in stereo? I know it's kind of early for you. I mean, like in terms of your development. I record in stereo all the time, but I don't only record in stereo because that's just not what you do. You record in stereo when it's feasible. Here's the catch, though. When I record in stereo, one of the things I have to ask myself is the source a single source with a single point of view, with a single angle, and are the mics essentially equidistant to the single source and the single angle? So if I said, let's just mic up one item, like a voice, and I don't normally do this, but let's just say I put stereo mics on it. If the stereo mics are equidistant, I would like to interleave that. That'd be fine. Not a problem. Why? Because more than likely left and right are just, the only difference is what one's on one side and the other one's on the other side, but they should represent the same values. But if, on the other side of this, okay, I was recording drums and I had overheads and I had an overhead left and I had an overhead right. Well, in this instance, I don't want interleaving. I very rarely will use interleaving in terms of left and right stuff for drums or left and right stuff for guitar. There's a lot of reasons why, but one reason why is very simple with drums. If you were to take a picture, if you've ever seen a picture of a drum set, if you've ever been around a drum set, if you've ever been near one, if you know what one is, you probably have realized that by looking at a drum set, none of it is technically symmetrical. Technically. Although they usually arrange it so that it's balanced, it's not symmetrical. You don't see 2 of the same size shells typically. Well, except for the snare is the same size around as a 12-inch tom if it's being used. Some guys don't use it. All that to say, on one side of the set, like if you're looking at it, if you were over here looking at it, on one side you typically have a hat. Do you have a hat on the other side? No, not typically. On that same side, you have a snare. Do you have a snare on the other side? Sometimes, but in rare cases. Most of the time, not. So already you're seeing the left mic has a different image. It has a different set of things going through it. Even though it still will hear everything on the other side, the direct path, the angle that it's being attributed to, is different than what it would be for the other mic. What ends up happening is when you watch the meters, they do this. They do this a lot. And so the reason you won't, hold on, the reason you won't want to interleave this is if you leave them separately, guess what you can do with them? Manipulate them individually. Manipulate them individually. Even then, furthermore, I don't even typically put them in a stereo track. I still use them as a mono track, mono left, mono right, representative of the ability to then EQ one in one fashion and EQ the other in the other fashion. Because depending on what type of room it is and what angles are being responded, one might have more brilliance, more high frequency in it. The other one might have more warmth. I don't necessarily want them to be too different from each other, so I'm going to have to balance them out so that they are somewhat alike. Does that make sense? Your question? Go for it.
When you're talking about how like the signal path for like the mic, how you set it up, like I have it in the book as well. Like certain ways a mic, like how certain inputs are connected, depending on to mix like a mic and the drum, stuff like that. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I'm mostly just talking about the use of manipulating the file after it's recorded. Okay. But yet how you have to look at that as part of the means of what is the source. In terms of the mic setup, I mean, you're going to have a lot of variations, and you'll have a lot of variations in the input, I should say the chain or the signal flow as it gets all the way down there. But, you know, one of the things you also have to look at too, because this is, I mean, this is kind of just being real, okay? Most microphones that are cheap are made on a factory floor. Most microphones that are somewhat decent are still hand soldered by someone. The really interesting part about that is you can buy 2 sets of mics and you're just really hoping, or you know, a pair of mics that are the same, they're identical. You're really just hoping that the characteristics really come off 100% the same. Really hard to tell in a situation that has some other variables, you know, again, the drum set being one of them, but really easy to notice as soon as you put them equidistant in front of something that's a single source, like a single voice. Obviously, there's only one area of projection, and then equidistant to each other. You will hear some qualities about them, but it's a really interesting thing to think about. As soon as you do that, then you really get into the flow. What am I using? You know, I mean, obviously you'll use balance lines, but you know what? They make balance lines in gold. They make balance lines in nickel. You know, I mean, there are variations of the balance line, and then the impedance that flows all the way, you know, to that. And then, you know, look at your interface. You know, try to turn any of those 2 knobs on your interface so that they're at the same level. Is there really an ability to do so? Not necessarily, because if you look at it, there aren't even any markings. You know, there's just all the way off and all the way on and somewhere in between. So yes, you have to consider it. You have to consider the placement. Ultimately, though, that consideration will lead you to decide whether or not to do this. Now, why I bring this up in the first place is because we do Command 2. Command 2 was what again?
Session setup.
Session setup. Now, session setup specifically. Let me get this going. Session setup specifically allows me to adjust that interleaving while I'm working. So I can actually make that change. You guys remember having that conversation? I can actually decide whether to be interleaved at any given time. I'm not sold to it. And when you do, and I'll let this open real quick, when you do use Command 2, which I can't use because my silly little keyboard doesn't have, well, actually there's a function. Oh yeah, it is. Nope. I just don't have a digipad. The Command 2 is in the numeric keyboard, so just understand that the 2 actually is in the keyboard. If I leave this on and I record now, what happens?
I just want to AIFF.
No. No. If I leave the interleaved option on, what happens? You mentioned it
All
earlier.
the multiple channels go to one file.
Yeah, right? So if I turn it off, then what happens?
And they'll create their own separate files.
Well, that's the catch. okay? If something's already interleaved, it's interleaved, and it'll represent interleaved. If something's already non-interleaved, it'll stay non-interleaved. The only time it'll change is if something is either newly recorded, or if you do some sort of processing that puts it to print or renders it. Now, now you guys may not be at this level yet, but have you guys used Audio Suite? Yeah. Audio Suite. Yes? No? Yes? A little bit. Okay. All right, we'll get there because we do that in this class. But as a part of Audio Suite, you see something called rendering. And essentially, it's a reprinting of the audio file, and it's embedding the processing that's taking place in Audio Suite. When it reprints, guess what? Whatever option that says is how it reprints it, even if it was the opposite beforehand. So it won't transition anything immediately. It will only do it if you reprint it or render it or do new recordings. Does that make sense? So keep an eye on it. Keep an eye on it specifically for a couple of reasons. One, this may be very beneficial for you for doing certain operations in the future. And it really, really will. It will help in a lot of ways for doing certain things in the future. Depends on what you're doing, but I mean, there's so many different variables that'll come in that you'll go, you know what, yeah, I need it, absolutely. And then you'll sit down and go, you know what, I absolutely don't today. I really need them separated. I really need to keep them in their individual positions. Okay, so now, when we were talking a bit ago, Mike, I said, hey, now this is going to be an interesting thing, but I said, how do we make sure that the files are going to the location that we choose and that they stay there? Now, there's a couple of big no-nos that take place here, okay? So let me give you a little word of caution. Okay, if you go overseas, okay, what was your name again?
Ryan?
Ryan. Okay. Sorry about that. I always forget the late ones. All right. So if you go overseas, all right, and I say, here, here, take this with you. Take this cell phone with you. Okay. I have the number. I'll call you, or whatever, and you call me. All right. Now, if he takes the cell phone overseas, and while he's over there, he just, he gets connected with some people or whatever, and they talk him into changing his number to a local number, and he never tells me, will I be able to reach him via that number that I originally had? No. And it's kind of one of those, it's kind of the same idea. He's gone, he's already gone, and the last communication we had was this is his number. But while he was gone, he changed it. This is the same idea amongst Pro Tools and any other thing, realistically, in software. While your Pro Tools session is open, you are not allowed to change any file names associated with Pro Tools. Associated with the session, nothing gets changed. Believe me, I know it's tempting because a lot of times I want to change stuff and I'm like, oh man, I just I need to get out of session so I can rename this because I want it renamed.
You're not allowed to change anything while Pro Tools is open?
Yep, not name-wise. Not name-wise. Okay, good example. Okay, you just bought a new hard drive. You start working on it. While you're working in Pro Tools, you're like, oh, I forgot to name my hard drive, and you want to name it, your name or something flashy. You do that after Pro Tools is open and the session is working off your hard drive. Guess what? Pro Tools won't know what the directory is to go back to your hard drive. Why do you think that is? Because you changed the name. Really interesting, if you change it back identically to what it was, it'll act like nothing ever happened. It really will. But I've done this a lot. Believe me, I know from experience. But I've done it a couple times where I changed it back to the name that I thought it was, and I was like, ooh, maybe I spelled that wrong. Or maybe there was a space here where there wasn't. Or maybe there wasn't, maybe there was some sort of, there's a capital letter here instead. And it takes me a couple of configurations to get back to where it was so now I can keep going. That's going to be a problem, okay? So just make sure that when you're renaming files, there is something you can do. There is something you can do if you rename a file while you're in Pro Tools. The only way you can rename a file while you're in Pro Tools, and I only give you this advice if you're advanced enough. If you're advanced enough, if you feel like you can follow through with your mind and brain power, then you can do it. If you use Option and drag the file, which makes it, in the Mac world, it makes a copy of the file. Meaning you have to copy the file first before you can rename it. You can't use that file and then rename it. You actually have to copy the file and then rename it because at least the original file is still there, right? It still belongs. It still exists somewhere. Does that make sense? I mean, it seems fundamental, but see, this is where some of the problems come in. I asked you to do an exercise for me. like I did last week, and you're in it, and all of a sudden you go, oh crap, I didn't put my initials on it.
Yeah.
You know, so what do? You can, in Pro Tools, go to Pro Tools, File, File, Save As, and rename it. Yes. You can't go to the Finder and then rename it, or add your initials until the session's closed. With the session's closed, you can do anything you, well, I can't say you can do anything you want. You can rename as much as you want to a certain degree, but again, even then, when the session's closed, this gets a little tricky. When the session's closed, you cannot go into the audio files folder and then rename those with anything you want. Even when the session's not open, if you rename or readdress any names associated with the audio files in the audio files folder, guess what they'll do when you try to open it up? That it won't recognize it. Now, it's smart enough to know what the code is, but it's going to make you manually search for it. It won't relocate it for you. I don't know how often you guys have opened a session and said, you know, 101 files are missing.
Yeah.
Would you like to automatically relink? Would you like to manually relink or whatever? Or would you like to skip? Now, let me just give you a word of warning. If you skip it and save and close, it won't ever, okay, this is kind of crazy, it won't ever effectively automatically relink, ever. If you do that the first time. For some reason, the systems just don't work that way. If you open it and you accidentally hit skip, or you do hit skip, but then you do a save as a new version, then you can always go back to your old version and open it up and then eventually take the time it takes to relink. Because I've been in a couple situations where I was like, I need this now and I need it done fast. I open something up and I'm like, oh, that's missing, but I don't need it. Right? But I may need it later, but if I save it, then I have to manually go look for it later. But if I just do a save as, it'll save it as a new version. When I go back to the old version, it will automatically relink it for me. Now, the relinking really takes a couple things. So let me just have this conversation with you. However many drives and however much space you have available to you will really determine how long it'll take to automatically find and relink. Most of the time, it's somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour. Okay? That's not a fun amount of time to wait for anything, and especially not when you're in creative mode. If you're like me, you're like, oh, I have an idea, I want to go do it. You run your Pro Tools system, you're really hoping everything's working so that you can go and function in that creativity. Although I've been there because I've obviously been in your shoes at one point in time where I just run up to my computer and I spend my entire night trying to fix it or trying to get it operating correctly, right? And so that's what we're trying to avoid. Now, there's a couple of key phrases I want to tell you about. I don't know that we got to last week. For this class, there's a couple of kind of mottos that I like to use as our staple, okay? But for today, we're going to operate under one of them. For sure, and if we get to another one, then I'll bring it out. Okay, and so you might just want to write this down, but think about this. Think about the importance of this at least. Okay, here's the catchphrase. Okay, it really is. You have to tell Pro Tools where to go. Okay, so if you want to write it as a phrase, you can just simply put in first person. I tell Pro Tools where to go. That is the first and foremost thing you have to know about being a Pro Tools engineer is you tell Pro Tools where to go. If you want it to go in the trash can, who tells it to go there?
I do.
Exactly. Absolutely. Now, there's a certain degree of responsibility in that. How many of you worked on a Mac or an Apple before you came to school? Okay, good. Anybody else? No. Neither did I. Of course, you know, I went to school in the year 2000, so you know, that was a long time ago, but so I've had some time. But here's the thing. Most people haven't. So there is kind of a fear of understanding the hierarchy or the levels of file extensions and where everything really belongs in the Apple world for people who've never used it before. But ultimately this. How many of you know how to operate your hard drives on a Mac? I mean, how many of you know how to find your files on the Mac? For the most part. Okay, well, if you're not using the search dialog in the Finder, if you're not using the search parameter, you could fall into one of two categories. If you're like me, you don't really use it a ton because you never lose stuff, and you always know where it's at. But you could fall on the other side, and you could just not understand how to use it effectively. Well, one of the reasons that I bring that whole thing up is you tell Pro Tools where to go. So one of the other mottos we're going to have, which I'll talk about later, so you can think on to write it down now, or we'll come back to it. You make your own work. Period. You make your own work. Period. I've been in so many, and just this week I was just stressed to the max. Just the other day I was stressed. I've been composing for a film. It's a short film, but I've been composing for a film, and one day I was just like, I don't have enough time. Things aren't really going the way I want them to. How did I get in this position? And I was like, oh yeah, I remember. I volunteered to do this project. Whose fault was that? That was mine, ultimately. It's my own work. I create my own work. Well, that's just one configuration of it. The other configuration of it is, if you don't know where you put your files, and you therefore are not a very organized file manager, guess what you're going to make for yourself?
Dilemmas.
Yeah, well, your own amount of work. You're going to spend more time finding files than using them for anything resourceful. Now, in my other classes, we have a lot of this conversation, but we have it here every now and then. Just remember that all of this means nothing because no one ever hears this. I mean, no one really ever hears this. All the stuff you're going to do when you get into color coding, when you get into markers, when you get into relabeling things, when you get into, I mean, really, when it comes down to the degree of tidiness that you will have to orchestrate. No one really hears it, but it has to be done for the usefulness of anything getting completed. Does that make sense? So you're going to make your own work in the future, but you're also going to make your own work in the future. So that's both a positive and a negative. You see both sides. They can go either way. You do things properly, right? You label them up. You do them as you go. You really focus on them. You're very organized. You back up at the end of every day. Guess what you're going to be? You know, I mean, you'll make your own work. You'll make a name for yourself. People will want to work with you. You know, you'll find your own destiny that lies on the other side of you being well managed by yourself instead of by somebody else. Realistic. So that's one way of it. The other way of it is you never get anything done. You can't ever find anything. Every time you take something to school, it doesn't work, right? You know, and so we have to just be our own, the masters of our own domain here. And guess what our new domain is? Pro Tools, right? So we're not just Pro Tools operators or Pro Tools engineers or Pro Tools hackers, right? We're Pro Tools professionals. There's a level of professionalism. So in the same way that you would have a professional means of organizing things between you and another professional, you have to professionally organize your means between you and the computer. So this is how we do this, okay? So the first thing I told you was, essentially, you tell Pro Tools where to go. Let's go to Setup. I know I've been talking a lot, that's what I do, they pay me. Setup. Go down to Disk Allocation. All right, if you're like me, you didn't make any tracks. I don't have any tracks in here. We're going to make some tracks, and we're going to look at this list, okay? Now, this brings me to a huge point. This is it's an empty window now. But here's an interesting concept, okay? You guys are all Pro Tools, I'm sorry, were you a Pro Tools 9 user before, or 8?
I kind of dabbled with it a little bit.
Okay, Pro Tools 10, your thing now?
Enough to be like, well, I had Pro Tools 10 now, so.
You'll know. When you got Pro Tools 10, did you freak out? Or were you excited?
I was happy I had it.
Okay, so there you go. So, yeah, so, I mean, you would know based upon that. Because anybody that was invested enough into 8 or 9 went, oh my gosh, you know. And
Yeah, but there's a big difference, like clip gain, stuff like that.
Yeah, but all those are really beneficial.
Yeah.
They're very beneficial. I mean, we get into those, and when we get into those, you guys are just going to go, well, I mean, I know we kind of dabble. Every now and then I get ahead of myself and get excited about showing something, and we do stuff that we're not supposed to, and then we have to come back to it later. But okay, so here's the thing. Here's the new addition to Pro Tools 10. New addition, Pro Tools 10. Okay? And technically it was a Pro Tools 9 thing, but now it's one of those things that it had to be. Anybody ever use Reason?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Reason's got Pro Tools beat on one thing. All right, probably lots of things, but one thing particularly. You know how we talked about interleaved? Interleaved was a bunch of stuff in one file. Well, Reason represents itself as one file ultimately and always. So essentially, when you're done with a Reason session that had all this stuff, audio, MIDI, samples, all that stuff, when it's done, you end up with one embedded file that you can hand off to somebody and say, here's my Reason session. They can take home, open up, and there it is, the whole thing. Well, the downside to that, obviously, is that there's not a lot of fast and easy access to everything that goes inside of that. So Pro Tools had to look at this and say, okay, well, what of this can be effective for us? And that concept, that whole saving files in a single entity kind of thing, because they had a lot of users that, I mean, who are they really selling to? They're selling to people who just want to make beats in their home. Pro Tools. I mean, they're selling to the artist. I don't know if you noticed there's a Pro Tools artist series. And it's a dumbed down version of all this, very, very limited, but it's essentially just designed for one person who maybe has a guitar and can sing to be able to open up Pro Tools and start working immediately. Well, they were finding that whole realm was really getting lost. All these bells and whistles, all these buttons, a little too much, a little overwhelming. Finding files, managing files. So what they did do is they began to embed MIDI. And they began to embed MIDI in the session itself. So .ptx currently harbors MIDI files if you record them. So in this listing, you're never going to see MIDI be a part of this. This will only refer to, well, and furthermore, there are no more fade files. If you were in the transition from 9 to 10, that was a new thing. Fade files are now also embedded in the .ptx. So embedding in the .ptx, we have fades and we have MIDI. Both of those are now embedded. Now here's another thing. Video will never be used in this kind of form as a reprint. So when you load video to Pro Tools, it doesn't recopy it. When you load audio to Pro Tools, it typically recopies it. And there's a reason we're going to have to make it do that. Because again, we're in charge. Who's in charge? We're in charge. We tell where to go. There's a means of doing that effectively because there's a way to not do that. But just FYI, video will never be reprinted or recopied in Pro Tools unless you force it, and there is one means of forcing it. So here's what I do. When I work with video in Pro Tools, I take the video file, I make a brand new session, I take the video file itself, and I drag and I drop it inside the session folder before I open it. So that it resources it directly from the location I want it to be. The reason they don't do that with video is because video is huge. You know, video, I mean, when I work with video, it's like 4 gigs, 8 gigs. I mean, it's a lot. It'll be very, very weighty if it says, okay, I was just given an 8 gig video, let me reprint it, which means duplicating it, essentially, for my own use and put it in my own folder. So now there's another 8 gigs. You see what I'm saying? It's just too big of a file. So the only thing you see here is audio, okay? So the only thing that will be represented here will be audio. So watch what happens. Let's just go ahead and hit cancel. Let's go ahead and just make, let's do Command-Shift-N, type the number 8. So we'll do 8 audio tracks. We can do mono and just hit create. Okay? Now here's what I want you to do. In your 8 mono audio tracks, let's go ahead and make up some fictitious names for them just for the sake of doing what we're going to do. Go ahead and make some fictitious names up for them. So you can call them whatever you want. I'm going to call mine kick, and snare, and hat, tom 1, tom 2, let's see, ride, overhead left, and overhead right, and I'm going to call it name. Okay? So let me know when you're, just look at me or not me or wave at me when you got that. Because then we'll go to the next one. Let's do this. Yes, no, how are we looking? Yeah, we'll do it. Yeah? Shouldn't be too bad, right? Sorry, I'm going to move over here because I've been sitting a lot today. Okay. So, now let's go back to setup, disk allocation. Let's take a look at this. And this is really going to be, this has to be memorized, okay? What did we just do? We went to setup and disk allocation. Now, just so you know, right now, we are operating outside of the text for right now, for one purpose, ultimately.
What do you mean outside of the text?
Outside of the book. Yeah, it's not. This is not in the book, and the reason we're doing this is for the same reason that when we did last week's stuff, we did the stuff that mattered most, and that's getting your interface online, and that's not in the book. This is not necessarily in the book, although it does, I think, appear in some of the later books at a higher level. The reason you need to know this is one of the ultimate keys in you always having your files. Now, how many of you learned save copy in? Save copy in function. Yeah, you probably learned it last term. Now there's some elements about it, but here's the thing. I use save copy in, but I only use save copy in at the end of a session. I was actually just looking at one of my sessions on my computer. One of the films that I'm working on, it was a 68 gig session, you know, and it's like all that work and all that stuff going into the build for composing and, you know, doing all the recording that goes into that. When I'm done with that, then I do a save copy in, and it stands as a means of not me transferring stuff or anything like that. It stands as a means of me compiling all the stuff that was my final version of everything. Instead of including all my extra takes, including any of the edits, I mean, I'm just going to literally go, all right, let's consolidate this crap and let's send it as a save copy in so that I have one ultimate finished version that when I open it up, it's just nice and fluid, and this is the final. It's not the one that you look at and go, oh, I can see where you did that, and I can see where this happened, and I can see where this transition worked, and I can see, you know, it's going to void all that. It's essentially going to wipe all that out. And that's the purpose I use it for. Other people like to use it for the purpose of making sure that any of the files that exist in their session exist in the session as they transfer it to another location. Well, guess what? An easier way to do that, because that is doable, an easier way to do that is to look at this and go, oh yeah, that's there. Now what the there is the following. Kick. What you see here with this root media folder, it's essentially the listing or the directory of the locations of the files. See where it says track? The track that says kick is on the teacher's drive. It's under the folder that says Vince, under yet another folder that says Audio 220R4 Term 4, and I included awesomeness for you guys. So that's what I'm hoping this class will be. And then one more folder exists. You don't see it because it's so far down the chain. But usually, the next folder that you don't see is the folder that says week 2, which is the one I made for this. The thing about it is typically, if you've even gotten this far, then you're okay. Like if you're looking at it going, okay, it's on the right hard drive. Well, that's number one, ultimately the most important thing, especially if you're using an external. So hopefully if you guys saved your session to your externals, and you know, those of you who have your externals, you should see your external as the listing.
Should be right in the middle, right?
Yeah. Yeah, now, if you click on this little arrow though, notice it gives you the option to go to any of the other drives. If you had a multitude of drives here, you'd see them. Or you can actually select a location or folder that you can go to. But this is what happens. Remember I was talking about what if your drive goes offline for a second? If you had already had created audio files, notice that you didn't have any. If you had already created them, it would have relocated their allocation to the hard drive. It would have said something like that, Macintosh 8.
Mine doesn't give me that option. That means what? I don't have nowhere else to save it to? Or
Oh, when you click on here, does it show Mac?
did not mention
Hit select folder. It should give you the whole listing, the whole workup.
so that folder.
So the error.
Oh, are you not clicking on the arrow?
Yeah, click on the arrow.
Click and hold. Click and hold.
Oh,
There you go.
click and hold.
Yeah, you hit cancel. So anyway, okay, so now here's some other, here's the big deal about this, okay? This is designed, the system has been designed so that, sorry, I'm trying to think of a great parallel. Okay, how many of you own a stereo? Some sort of stereo, okay? Okay, now, as soon as your stereo doesn't have a function that it really should, that would be beneficial for you to keep it for a long time, it becomes obsolete. One of those functions is an aux in. You know, for those of you who are using iPods, you know, I mean, like everybody mostly is by now. Without that one element, it kind of makes you go, you know what, you know, if it just happens that I end up with extra money and I'm at a store that sells stereos, maybe I might want to get one that has, you know, this jack, because then I don't have to, you know, then I can actually listen to my stuff where I keep all my music, I can listen to it through real speakers. Okay? Now that's not everybody's deal. There's other means of that. There's other, you know, elements of that. But all that to say, that's how they built Pro Tools, with the idea that as soon as someone finds something that they can't do, they're going to go, well, who makes something that does this? And then they're going to go buy that product. So it is essentially the industry standard because it is the most advanced. It's the most advanced in terms of networking. It's the most advanced in terms of synchronization. It's not the most advanced in terms of MIDI. That's for a lot of reasons, but it can be. That's the catch. It can be used in very advanced forms for MIDI. It's just you have to spend a lot of money to update and put the plugins on it that it takes to do that. That's the downside most consumers find. It's like, well, I already spent this much on Pro Tools, but if I want this, then I have to spend another $400 or $500. You know, I don't know if you ever go on to Pro Tools or at the website. They have some plugins that are just synthesizers that are $1,000 or $1,500 for just a synthesizer plugin. You know, I mean, there are compressors on there. Of course, the SSL stuff. I mean, there's a lot of heavy-duty stuff. You can spend a ton of money on this. I don't know that there's anybody that's ever just gone out and gotten everything, but if there was, I mean, you're probably talking somewhere between $32,000 and $40,000 on just software. And that's not worth it. I mean, obviously, you know that's not worth it. Why? Because there's so many other ways we can get around. I mean, we can do so much more without having to go nuts, right? Well, this is one of those things, okay? So here's the idea. You kind of see, when you drive down the highway, you know what a choke point is, right? You're understanding what's a certain degree of bottlenecking. Bottlenecking, meaning things come down to a spot where, you know, they could be they can build 10 lanes out there, right? As soon as it comes down to one spot where there's only 2, you know, you can be miles away and it's still affecting you when you're trying to drive to school. And I know, because I get frustrated. Every day I drive, well, okay, it kind of, for us, gets us on both sides, because realistically, what time do we come to school? During somewhat of a traffic hour. And when we leave, then that's usually the time that they've decided to shut a bunch of lanes down so they can do their overnight work. So it's like, can't catch a break, you know, it's a 30-minute drive to get, you know, 8 miles. So, all that to say, same world with hard drives. You probably haven't realized this because you haven't really pushed your hard drive to capacity. And by capacity, I'm talking about network flow. The flow of transmission to and from the hard drive. Not how much is on there, but essentially what's being communicated. So what happens is this. In most professional studios, they have offset the degree of need of essentially that bottleneck position by doing something called, well, custom allocation options being one of them, and round robin for new tracks being another. Now these are very dangerous elements, but they're all designed so that technically what you can do in order to keep your system moving fast and fluid, especially if you have 100+ tracks, which a lot of large studios do, you can essentially say, all right, well I have 6 hard drives, and I'd like the computer system to span all of my files amongst 6 hard drives evenly so that each of these hard drives has the opportunity to move more rapidly. Does that make sense? Now, furthermore, they make network drive systems that are able to network just the same way we use the alias. Well, we're locked out of the alias in this format. You know how we use the audio alias and we share stuff? Well, some studios use their network alias in a live format, but there's a danger to it. It has to stay in that format, or in target mode, essentially, which you'll hear about in the future. Well, all that to say, they're able to have one room full of hard drives. One room full of hard drives. And that one room full of hard drives will be the hard drives for their entire facility. Instead of having any localized drives. Which they all, obviously, they're Apple computers, they all have localized drives, but they won't use their localized drives because they'll get a faster connection to these externals. That's how it's used, and that's why it's there. But also, on the downside to it, you don't find this in GarageBand. You don't find this in the cheaper DAWs. Because there's no need for you to say, oh, let's send kick one place, let's send snare another place. There's no technical need. So the reason that you have to be smarter than the computer system on this is because they built it so that it's advanced enough to do anything you want to do in terms of file management. But guess what? You still have to be in charge enough to understand what you're trying to do, and then therefore walk in here and actually confirm that it's doing what you want it to do. So, as a new order of things for you to have to do, so you're going to have to add this to your list. When you start recording, other than making sure your interface works, other than making sure that all the gear is connected, that the lines are where they're supposed to be, you also must check the disk allocation before you press record. It's a must. Why is it a must? Because if you start recording and it's in a different location, you have to find the location, you have to re-import the file. There is a workaround for it, but but you kind of have to be a little bit more advanced to be able to put that through to the end. Easiest way to not have this problem is to just check your disk allocation. Now look, check this out, okay? So you guys ready? I'm gonna... Okay. All right, so I made my tracks, okay? So I'm gonna start a stopwatch, all right? So just real quick, here goes the stopwatch. Here goes disk allocation. Oh, look, they're all in the right place. All right, and I'm going to stop my stopwatch. So 5.8 seconds, right? 5.8 seconds. That's all it takes to make sure all your stuff belongs. It's really that easy. And that's why I mentioned it. Because a lot of people are like, I don't need to check it. I mean, it's right there. I'll tell you why you need to check this. Okay, so let's get into story time. The first job I had as an intern turned into an engineering job by the end of the week, which was awesome. Because I literally spent like a day and a half as an intern, pretty much right after I got out of college. Well, my biggest moment at that studio that I was at really came when I got a phone call in the middle of the night, and my boss was like, "Hey, I'm freaking out right now. I have a band, an artist who took their whole entourage to LA, and they recorded in our facility, and when they got to LA, none of their files were on their hard drive. And now we owe them a lot of money because they paid a producer, they blacked out a studio to go get all this stuff done, you know, and half their project is missing, so they can't do anything." So, you know, and he was freaked out. There's a couple things that go into that, which is really interesting, but, so he said, "Can you go to the studio? Can you see what happened? Can you see what went wrong? Can you find the files?" And I was like, okay, well, now let's just start by having this conversation too. When I was in college, I mean, there wasn't a facility that had this many computers. I mean, even the DMV, you know, I mean, just, that was probably the biggest location you could go to that had that many computers in one room. I mean, it didn't happen like this. We had 4 computers in our entire program. And this is 2000, 2004, you know. So, needless to say, every time we walked into the studio, those computers would be junk. People would have disconnected everything, the hard drives would be offline. I mean, you'd walk in sometimes going, "Where the heck's the mouse? You know, someone took the mouse. We don't know where the mouse is. Bring your own mouse day. You know, go find a mouse and bring it in." And honestly, it was a travesty. But I'll tell you this, I have never been more thankful that I've had to put together so many systems in working order before until the first time I was in a crisis for work. And my crisis for work was very easily averted because the first thing I did is I opened our copy of the session, because we had a backup of it online, or on our computer system. And here's what I did. I went in here and I looked and I said, "Oh, well, there's the obvious reason why stuff's missing. Every other one of these is a different hard drive." Now, I'll tell you this. Don't ever use this function. Don't ever use this function unless you plan on doing everything in one room and never taking it anywhere. Round robin is a very beneficial function for certain studios. Let me tell you an example. Here's a great example. If you ever work for Disney or Fox or ABC, well, Universal, if you ever work for anybody who's big and you work for their studio, guess what? They own everything. When you walk into their facility, you walk in with nothing. When you walk out of their facility, you walk out with nothing. You don't get to take anything with you, period. And their security checkpoints are as such where you hear leaks on the internet of this or that. Well, you know what? There are some slip-ups in their security protocols. But most major projects, major films, major artists, not only do you sign contracts that say you're never going to take anything out of that facility because it's the property of whoever really owns it, you know, whoever the publishing group is or whoever the production house is. Not only do you sign those that say you'll get fired, more than likely if you get caught taking anything out of there, you'll also get sued. And especially if you leak it. There's major lawsuits that happen in that regard. Well, that's when round robin's okay, because guess what? Nothing's ever leaving that facility. But what round robin is it says, okay, hey computer, you decide where you want to put stuff. Wherever, it's almost like, you guys ever defragmented on a PC? Where it compacts all the files and it says, okay, well, we're just going to make it nice and tight and tidy. Essentially, it's all it's doing. It's just saying, and it's doing it in live, in real time. It's just saying, you know what? I think the newest track that came in, the best location for it to run fastest is over here on this hard drive. But again, that works when you have 10 hard drives or you have a whole network of hard drives. That works. Otherwise, never do it, because guess what? It's going to throw everything everywhere. And if you never check here, then you'll never find it. This option was on our studio computer, and I don't know if our guy that did this, that was working on that session, was the one that manually did this. It essentially sent everything everywhere. So I called my boss immediately and I said, well, I can tell you that this vocal track is on this hard drive and this other track is on this hard drive, so it'll only take me a matter of minutes to go back and find every one of them and put them back together. Now, that's how you'd be able to go in and say yes. Now, here's the thing. He lost his job, never seen again, which, you know, I'm sure, well, could be various reasons, but I do know this. I saw that band not only 2 weeks later, you know, maybe 2 weeks later, they came in to do more stuff. Surprisingly, they came to do more stuff at our facility. I'm surprised we didn't lose that job. But they also said, we will never come back if you don't get rid of this guy. And our boss fired him immediately. Well, guess what? 2 things happened. 1, I took his job, which is great, because it's a pay raise for me. 2, the next time I saw them, and this, I mean, I kid you not, this was not something that's ever happened to me before. They gave me literally the manager reached in his pocket and he goes, here, thank you, $250 tip, you know, and I mean, I was just like, that's amazing, thank you, all I can say is thank you, you know. I went on to work with them on some other projects, which was really cool. Some of the other tips I got were more gear oriented. Oh, we don't use that habit, you know, and still get paid on top of that. But those are really good connections to make. Well, guess what? It was just this. I mean, if you think about that, the guy lost his job, you know, made to look like a fool. I tell the story about him almost every term, you know. I don't even remember his name. You know, but it's all this. What was that? 5.8 seconds, right? 5.8 seconds to save. Not only, now this is what gets frustrating. I've lost stuff before. How many of you lost stuff before? Anybody lost stuff? The real thing is if you're working with an artist, most of the time they don't do that. They don't go into the studio and give their worst performance. Most of the time they go to the studio and they give their all. They give their best performance. They give everything they got. If you lose it, you're losing something that cannot be given back. There's no way to give that back. That's why at the end of the day, it's always beneficial to back up. And I know it's hard because it's financial. There's financial reasons. You get a hard drive that you use, you get a hard drive that you back up to. Now, I'm one of those guys and I know, here's what I do, okay? I take a drive, I fill it up, you know, I fill it up, put it in a box. It goes in my stash. And then I have a backup, and that backup, this is how, because people always ask me, I have a backup of everything. And that backup is backing up everything. Well, when the backup gets full, what do? Well, you know what, realistically, I have to get another backup. The backup's got to go in the box too. So, I mean, there's so many hard drives. You go into my little office here, and there's so many hard drives just in one spot, and you're like, look at all these hard drives. Well, every one of them has a backup. Now, there comes a time in life where you just got to let go. Now, some of that stuff is now at the point where I can let it, I mean, I have stuff from when I was in college, my junior year in college, my senior year in college. I mean, it's still all backed up on a backup, you know. Now, what I normally do is I try to burn as much of it as I can to DVD, but now at the file size that I'm using, that's just not feasible because that's just a lot of DVDs. You know, you're talking 10, 12 DVDs just to back up one project. That's a little frustrating to have to work with. And I've had to piece back together some of the projects off of DVD. So it becomes, if they all don't fit on one, then I usually just keep it on the hard drive somewhere. All this to say, you do need to know where this stuff is. This is really the thing that you are in control of. You're not in control of much. When you get in with an artist and you're getting yelled at, you just remember this. You're not in control of much, okay? So the one thing you can control is that your files actually go to the right spot. Now, moving on, we're going to take a break in about 20 minutes. 7:30 is our dinner mark. Moving on to Module 2.
Well, is there any reason that you want those files to go to separate places? Those tracks to go to separate places?
Is there any reason that what do you mean?
You know how they're all the same. Is there a reason or?
Yes. Well, that's what I was saying. The hard drives will run faster if they go to different locations. The hard drives will run more fluidly if they go to different locations. But the only way that that is feasible is if you know exactly what you're doing, and if at the end of the day you will have to orchestrate a saved copy in order to put them all in one position at the end of the day. But you're not really going to want to do that at your level. If you only have 2 hard drives, that might not benefit you. And especially if you have a hub, if like you're sending all your hard drives to one hub anyway, they're going to end up hitting a little bit of a point where they're all going to have to come together anyhow. So most of the time you'll do this if you have a tower, you have a nice tower, and you got a lot of stuff going on. Yeah, this is feasible. But that's when. That's when. Now, as an example, there's a buddy of mine, a real good friend in LA, and his roommate was an engineer for Hans Zimmer. And I don't know if you ever go online, but if you ever go online and search some of these people, you go online and search Hans Zimmer studio, there's a lot of pictures of it. Studio pictures are hard to get because usually they're dark and the studios are kind of dark. But you go look at it, you're going to see a couple of towers. I should say racks of computers. And all those computers are networked to run just one session of Pro Tools. And so there are sessions, there'll be sessions of 800 and some tracks because it's for a full feature film. And it has to hit the duration of what a full feature film is these days, plus a lot more. Most composers write more than what they need. So you're talking, 2+ hours worth of content spanned out at either a 96K or a 192 because they're in HD audio world. They're not in 44.1 land. So everything's already massive. So yeah, absolutely. When you're in facilities like that, you have to. You rely on it. You're only going to be as strong as your slowest element, and that's how they really get the speed going. Now, a couple things. We're going to start off. What's up, buddy?
Sorry about that, man.
Were you in this class?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Just make sure you sign in.
I go back. Took the keys on accident. I had to go bring them back on the bus. Sorry about that.
Okay, so, all right. Here we go. We're going to go to setup. And we're going to do a couple of things. One, let's go to hardware, and I just want to mention something about this. Remember how we were talking last week a little bit about the clock source? We talked a little bit about it, and it was in the session setup window. In reference to clock source, you need, at this point in time, if you're going to use any other devices, you're going to see each one of them listed here. See where it says peripherals? You would actually see a listing of them here. This listing gives you the ability to choose the clock source styles. And you're going to be doing this when you get into your next class, you're going to be working with clock sources. You will immediately begin to work with clock sources. Why? Because you're going to be using external devices that have to be synced in order to run in time. Does that make sense? So it's going to happen quickly. But looking at this, go ahead and hit OK, and let's go back to the Playback Engine where we kind of started off with our day. We just need to talk about a few of these functions, and one more function that I want to add to this list, and then we'll take a break. We only have 15 minutes, not too bad. What I'm going to do is when we go on break, I'm going to see if we can get into the room upstairs. If 202 is open, I'd like to take you up to the 003s. If it's not, if someone's in there, then we'll wait till the week that no one's in there, and we can jump up and go look at the control surfaces up there, because there's a couple of things that we do need to talk about as a group. Okay, hardware buffer size. Hopefully this has been somewhat explained to you. I'm going to give you just the same way I talked last week. I'm going to give you the real in-depth version. I'll give you the layman's terms. Okay. So, and then of course somewhere in between, we'll get to it. Hardware buffer size is this. Okay. From an intricate level, what it really dictates is it's the samples that you see that it's showing in terms of a number there that says how many samples. What it's going to say is how many samples are being harbored, okay? How many samples are being harbored in an allotment of time that essentially is kind of a means of trickery, okay? What the trickery is this. How many of you have ever pushed play and then your system started seconds later? You push play, boom, now it starts. How often do you see, because you'll see this, well, and I could probably even do it now, I don't have any audio on it. Let's see how long it takes to, I'm going to hit this, and we'll see how long it takes to play. Yeah, this is very, very minimal. If I open up another session that I have for you, you'll see how long it takes to play. We'll have that conversation. Here's what happens. Yes or no, just based upon what you think. Okay, so this is the polling thing. Okay, how many of you think that the information that's coming from your hard drive is a continuous flow?
No.
No? No?
I don't think it would be like this.
No? No?
Digital, I think so.
No. Okay. Well, that's good because now we're on the same page. Okay. Now here's what happens. You ever heard your hard drive spin? You guys hear your hard drive spin? What the big deal about solid state is supposed to be? I don't know if you guys have heard of solid state drives. They're the newest thing. They're like 3 to 4 times as much as the hard drives that you have are now. And what they do is essentially they use a rotationless disk, so to speak. Compact flash, you guys ever use compact flash? Or SD cards? SD cards, have you ever used an SD card? USB, by the way, USB flash drive. Those are representative of solid state, although they're not technically solid state. They represent what a solid state drive would be like. There's not a moving part. There's no moving parts. It's just a storing of data that gets recalled off of a singular entity that doesn't spin. Well, all these hard drives spin. Those hard drives don't. Solid state's like the new wave of continuous data that flows because there's not a spinning. Well, technically, okay, they run at speeds that are like 10 times faster than these, which is why they're so expensive. We haven't gotten into it being a functional element yet because right now you can go get 3, 4, 6 terabyte drives out there. Solid state, you can get like a 250 or a 500 gig. I mean, they're really expensive. They're so expensive. You'd have to be, pretty much rich to go buy a 1 terabyte solid state drive. Not really worth it. It's like what Blu-ray players were like when we were younger, when they first came out. The first Blu-ray player was like $1,200. Good luck jumping on that, right? Okay, so all that to say, our drives are non-continuous. They do send information a lot and all the time. But guess what? What they do is they tend to kind of do this in waves. It's like a series of information being sent. Okay? Doesn't mean that they can't give you continuous data to a certain deal. But when you're typing on Word, you don't need much of a representation of continuous data because there's not a whole lot of stuff. I mean, realistically, that's nowhere near as complex as what we do. And even then, guess what? Here's a shocking idea. What we do is in no way, shape, or form near as heavy as what video does. So the video guys look at us and go, oh, audio, those guys don't know anything because they don't do anything that's half as hard as what we do. It's not that it's really that much harder. It's more just realistic of the file size, and the file management is at such a larger scope. You need a better computer than we do. They are essentially the ultimate in terms of processor speed, RAM size, the cache, and we'll talk about that, and really getting all that information to be a fluid entity, because without it, what they do is they go in and they go, oh, let's do a crossfade from scene to scene, and their computer seizes up and goes, no, we have to render this first before you can watch it. And then they have to wait for that amount of time, and then they can watch it. And then they're like, oh, I don't like it, I need to retime it or recut it, and then they have to wait again to render, and then they can watch it. So that's why they have that problem. Well, in our world, ours looks a little different. What happens is, the hardware buffer size, I'm giving you the long version, so I'll give you the short in a sec, okay? So the real easy stuff will come out eventually. The hardware buffer size essentially is this, okay? It's an element that allows for a timing, a grace period, if you want to consider it that. A grace period set between when the stuff actually comes off of the hard drive and when you actually hear it. That'll solve a lot of problems. If you can understand that, that'll solve a lot of your problems. Really, really well. It's really that grace period. How long it's taken for the computer to actually do it, and then for you to actually hear it. Now, because the computer doesn't have an ability to foresee the future, it mimics, and you'll see this a lot in audio. There are some things, like there are some plugins that use a look ahead. The computer, it's almost like this, okay? The computer can't see the future, so in order to trick you into thinking that it's intuitive, it just delays the output of everything to a degree that by the time you actually get it, it feels like it's being intuitive and seeing into the future of what's about to happen. So, example being, 512 will represent a very, very short amount of latency, what we call latency, which just means delay. 512 is a non-noticeable amount of latency. So what it's really saying is it's going to do this, okay? And I don't know that I have anything. Oh, okay. So there's a couple ways to think about this. Well, actually, there's a really, well, of course that's not the best. Okay, there's a couple ways to think about this, okay? A couple ways to think about this is this. If this section of the cable represented, or what passes through, represented play, okay? I want you to just hold this. Don't do anything with it yet. Okay, if I want to represent a seamless amount of playback for this gentleman here, he's going to pull it and it's going to represent, this output's going to represent the fluid amount of playback, okay? Well, watch what has to happen in the in-between as we transition from what's essentially being stored on the disk, okay? Go ahead and pull it slowly, okay? I'm going to have to keep feeding chunks so that it feels like what he's really getting is a fluid flow. And all I'm really doing is moving faster on this side and moving slower on the back side, on the actual release. So what the computer system is going to do is it's going to take information from the hard drive really quickly, which is why you, especially when you're working hard, it's going to go, and you'll hear it kind of spinning, kind of churning. I'll take this back. You're hearing it really dying on the other side, but yet you're hearing a nice continuous flow of audio. And what it's really doing is it's using the buffer. That's really what the buffer is. The buffer is the go-between. The buffer is the element that sits in between and says, all right, well, I'm gonna limit the amount of flow on the output so that I can have enough time. Just give me enough room to do this. Yes?
Is it like a funnel effect?
Absolutely. Funnel effect would be fantastic. And in particular, if you think about a funnel and you just think of the concept that you have to continually keep something going out of the bottom, you could really just keep shoveling stuff into the top. And this is what you look like, but on the other side, it's just continuous, 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 continuous. Absolutely. 100%. Good job. Yes, sir.
Is that like when you got a low buffer rate, the latency when you record, like you can hear it a couple seconds after because it's taking too long?
Well, it's actually the opposite. This is what happens. With a low amount of buffer,
Oh no, you got to turn it in here right after that.
Yeah, with a low amount of buffer, the analogy Lisa used was fantastic because let's think about this. If I have a little funnel, okay, just imagine a little funnel. If I have a little funnel and I'm filling just a little funnel, then there might be moments, if I'm not fast enough filling it, that it chokes off and there's nothing coming through. That gets represented in Pro Tools in two ways. One, see right here where it says ignore errors during playback. If I don't select that, way number one is the playback stops. If the buffer doesn't keep up. Number two, if I select this, it's going to keep playing. It's just going to go, it's going to make these digital pops and clicks and noises. So some people prefer it one way or the other, but that is optional. So keep it going. I preferred it, well, to be honest, I always preferred it to stop, so I knew when there was a problem, until I started using Reason, which only does the ignore errors thing, until it completely ceases. So then I got used to hearing it every now and then, and I was like, ah, not a big deal, so I just started using it after a while. But I mean, I'm doing, well, I was having a conversation with my wife last night, and I was like, yeah, she was like, how's your day going? And I was like, oh, it's going good, my computer is giving me guff, but I'm doing good. And she's like, well, we just bought a brand new computer. She's like, your new computer? And I was like, well, yeah. I was like, I mean, once I got a new computer, I filled up as much CPU power as I could possibly harness out of it. So, I mean, I wasn't going to just, you know, I wasn't going to go lightly on it. I was going to go, well, how decked out can I make this entire thing be? You know, so that's just me, I guess. But, and of course, at that point in time, I was like, hey, HD all the way, right? Instead of being half the file size, I'd double it and get up there to 96K and really get things, you know, at a high quality. So anyway, so the fix, if you have that problem, the fix is what?
To give it more buffer size.
Yeah, give it more space. Now, here's the catch. Here's the problem. The problem is, as you raise your buffer size, latency ensues. Because you do something and it takes a moment to hear it. You do it, it takes a moment to hear it. So you have more latency, more delay, if you raise that sample. If you raise that buffer, more delay. So here's a suggestion, and it's in the book, and I could just find the page for you so you can go, oh yeah. Oh, here it is. Page 33. Page 33. This is on the midterm. It's also on the final exam. All All right, and a lot of times I like to point these out to you so you go, oh crap, and then you write it down, or you highlight it, okay? That's what I'm hoping for. You guys will remember this. Now this is kind of, now here's, someone asked me why I have to configure a Pro Tools session before I jump out and use it, because we're doing, like this weekend, we're going to do, we're going to be recording with some Gibson artists. We're going to be doing some recording out in the field. I always like to check out the computers before they go out into the field for a couple of reasons. One, depending on what I set this at last, whatever I was doing with the computer last, this might not be the appropriate setting or setup for how I'd like to use it on the next thing that I do. And this really comes down to it. You see it right here. Page 33. See where it says record, recording live input? Recording live input. What type of settings do I use? And it says it right there. Lower hardware buffer size. Why? Exactly. Latency is annoying if you've ever heard it. If you've never heard it, you're probably going, what's the big deal? Nothing like sounding, nothing like having a delay on your voice to constantly make you feel weird about, you know, talking. And I know, I was at a stadium one time and I had to talk, and it was the first time I'd ever had to do this, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be awesome. The first moment I got up there, I stepped up to the mic. What's up, buddy? Stepped up to the mic, and I went to speak, and I started talking, and all of a sudden I got lost in the delay. I was like, it was just kicking back, kicking. I just say one word, and it was like, and trying to not sound like you have to wait for the delay to stop makes you. I mean, you have to start talking slow if you start listening to it. So it's like kind of have to tune it out. 10 is just me, it's just me, you know. That was more nerve-wracking than people. Talking in front of people is not a big deal. Well, having to listen to that, I was like, you gotta be freaking kidding me. So that's where that's gonna come into play. People are gonna really have a hard time feeling comfortable if they constantly feel like everything they do has this weird, like, kind of delay, right? So you have to make sure. Live recording meaning anytime someone's playing anything that they're recording that they need to hear. Now here's an additional thing though. If they don't need to hear it, it doesn't matter. You can raise that buffer size all day.